That's perfecting pediatric patient management. For a little teaser, a little thing to keep us motivated from now until the exhibit hall cocktails and conversation. I got some coffee. So at the end of the Q&A, in that 15 minutes, if you ask questions, you'll get a bag of coffee. So just to put that out there. So we have 4 bags of coffee before we get out of this.
I think that means.
Yes. I don't have, but you're gonna need coffee in the morning after your meal, right? So it all kind of evens out.
We're trying to keep you awake. Coffee for the visitors also.
No,
Thanks, man.
but they don't. All right, our first speaker is Brian Perfette. He is well known in the Pacific Northwest. He's at the University of Washington for many years, and he's been at Seattle Children's Hospital for the last 3 years. His talk of what you've seen, he was just talking about surgery at Seattle Children's Hospital, reducing circuit size to reduce blood to patients, or even going completely bloodless for pediatric patients. Brian.
Thanks, Justin. So you guys heard a lot of this next door, but just talking about, trying to go bloodless with these small neonates. So no disclosures. I do want to thank AMSEC for letting me present. Thanks to my perfusion team, Amy, who is here. And this has been a long process and a lot of changes on the way. And what I'm going to talk about does definitely add stress to our job. So I first started this is the wrong one. Oh well. So I first started in 2020. And at that time, Dr. Bahuda, our surgeon, who we keep talking about, is the one who really pushed for this blood change. So again, when I first started, the kids from 0 to 12 kilograms, we were priming with 180 mLs of blood to 220 of PRBCs, and then a half unit of FFP. So we really wanted to try to do these kids with less blood or bloodless. So the first iterations that we had, we raised the venous reservoir and arterial pump head to shorten the AV loop. We also reworked the muff system to cut down on that prime volume from 90 to 27. A big thing was we took out the heat exchanger for that. During this time, we partnered with the Heart Center leadership team, and that kind of got us all on the same page. And for the perfusion side, we really wanted to increase our blood volume and surface area for our circuit. And then we set some crazy goal to try to do these kids bloodless. So we went for it. And then, Dr. Bahuda is the one, again, who is pushing for all this. And these are his results from when we first started. So in May 2021 to February 2023, 102 neonates. Again, these are neonates. They're not, these bigger infants. So we're just talking about the neonates. So we had 3 that were excluded early due to early reoperation. So we had 56 clear prime and 43 that got blood. So I'm going to talk about the 56 that did not get blood. Early on, selection was highly subjective. We did a lot of these with Dr. Lubomir. It took some time to evolve with doing, the easier cases with some of the other surgeons to move forward. And now essentially almost every case we're trying to do bloodless, which is kind of incredible. Exclusion criteria for these results were a weight of less than 2.5, hematocrit. If starting hematocrit less than 35, we wouldn't use it. And then if they were hemodynamically unstable before bypass, we weren't using those. So for us, our targets for crit, 24 while on bypass, post-bypass, post-operative, we wanted 21 for the 2 ventricle kids, and then 27 for the, which none of that is up there, for the 1 ventricle kids. So we followed those guidelines, and this is kind of what we looked at, kind of while we're on pump. We want to make sure our NIRS didn't drop more than 20%. SVO2, we want to keep greater than 60. We want to make sure we weren't giving excessive drugs more than we would normally give. Sometimes we have to go a little bit more, but we don't want to give too many to keep that pressure where it should be. And then also just the blood gas in normal range without excess rise in lactate. So of those 56, 42 did get RBCs, and of that, 25 did receive FFP, cryo, or platelets, or a combination of those. So the exciting part is 14 of these neonates were left the hospital transfusion free. So they didn't get any products in the OR, after the OR, anywhere in the hospital, no blood products. So to jump into some of the results, the weight was similar, 3.3 in the kids that did not get blood versus 3.2. The crits were a little bit higher, 43 versus 40. And we've kind of seen that in our practice now with these really small kids. Anything 40 and under is difficult. So that's why we're constantly trying to change that circuit to try to see if we can kind of get that population as well. More results. For this, so post-op day 1, crits for the kids who did not receive blood was actually 31, and the kids who did receive blood was 35. An EEG was performed, and for these 14 kids who did not receive blood, there was no evidence of seizure. And then the bottom part, which is kind of exciting, the kids who did not receive blood were on the ventilator a lot less, 22 versus 66 hours. Length of stay in the ICU was lower, 5 days versus 7. And then just total hospital stay was 10 days versus 15. So that was great to see these results kind of early on. And the hematocrit discharge was, pretty close to what it was with the kids that got blood. These 14 kids, 9 were ARCH, plus or minus ASD, VSD. 3 of these kids were switches, 1 truncus, and 1 Norwood. So with our program, moving forward with this and getting better at this, a few months ago, I actually did a 2.3 kilogram truncus case, and kid did great, no blood, the hospital stay and came off. So we are able to do these a little bit more difficult cases and get through them without blood. So along with all this, this is what our anesthesia worked on around the same time frame, May 2021 to September 2022, because it's not just red blood cells, it's all the blood. To leave the hospital without blood, they can't receive anything. So they looked at their hemostatic factor transfusion, and what they really wanted to look at is are they giving blood just to treat a number that we pull before we come off bypass, or are we actually actively bleeding and we need to give these products to help with that? Kind of skip. So I didn't want to go too much into their what they found just because of time's sake, but they kind of found the same thing. No hemostatic factor transfusion in 18 of these kids. But the interesting thing is you can see even with like low platelet counts, only 2, but some of these even INR greater than 2.5. They weren't giving FFP, and these kids were still doing good. And there was no surgical bleeding enough where we needed to give products. This I kind of put in here just to show that a 4 kilogram kid with a really long bypass run of 4 hours and 25 minutes, we can still do those bloodless, even with a long bypass run on a small kid. So kind of the fun part for us, the circuit change, this is what we actually get our hands on, what we get to be a part of. The next big steps we made was we brought the oxygenator up another 10 inches. We shortened the venous line. We moved the patient actually lower, their head lower on the bed, so we could really get our pump closer to the bed. We shortened our pump boot even more, and we still, we wrapped all these kids. So this is kind of what you guys again saw next door. This is kind of our current neonate setup for these kids. Anything under 4 kilos, we do use the 3/16 inch boot. Also, we use the 1/8 inch for the vents, which I think has been really helpful, just because we don't have that hold-up volume that just sits in the tubing. Because during these cases, we are just right at 24, 25, and we'd rather have that blood in our circuit so we can filter off, so we can stay above that threshold, so we don't have to give blood. With our oxygenator really high, we still haven't had to use vacuum. Again, we kind of talked about that. It hasn't really been necessary, and our drainage is still good. This was a little bit outdated slide. It's actually our volume now is 128. And again, we did this throughout the process just to kind of see, we can always do the calculations, but kind of seeing what we're doing is nice, just to visually see it. So with this, so how we got to the 128 is we finally got our new circuits in from our last iteration, which seems to take forever. Ron will talk about that a little bit more in detail during his presentation and how fun it is to keep changing your circuit. And this, I don't know why this picture came out so well, but it kind of looks like a heart with how we cannulate. So if it doesn't look like that, we make the surgeon fix it so every case looks like that. So as you can see, here is where it comes off, and this actually just comes straight to us. We don't have, before they like have all the loops and like they'd flip it throughout the case and move cannulas. They don't do any of that anymore. And which has been great is all the surgeons have bought into what Dr. Bahuda is doing, and I'm surprised they changed their ways, but they have. So again, are we getting too close to the surgical field? We still want to get closer. As you can see, we have like a CDI in line here in this photo. It's actually a bigger circuit, but can we get closer? We've been trying to minimize any sterility issues with kind of putting some sterile drapes over. So that's something we're always watching and we're concerned about. But so far, no real issues. We do muff all these kids. We use HPH Junior, small prime volume. We did switch again to a 1/4 inch in the Raceway, which is a new change that we just made to cut down on that volume. It does still remove efficiently enough, 100 mLs for every 10 minutes. And we think it's the best way to give what volume is left in the circuit back to the patient versus like sending it to Cell Saver. Because with these small prime volumes, even sending it to Cell Saver, we might not get any cells to give back. So again, with our new pack, again, all of this stuff is gone. It's only just like a few inches here, just to cut down anywhere we can on volume. This we have in here just to kind of show this was like a good wrap that we did with the neonate. We got 65 mLs off. So with our current 128, we're going on bypass with only 63 of clear fluid, which is kind of crazy from where we started. I don't know why those. So DO2, I left this slide in here. Don't look at the numbers. I just wanted to talk about it. DO2 has been a real push over the years, and a few of the new articles are showing with peds they want a 350 or higher. We're not getting there. Some of the cases we can, but it is hard going bloodless. Our crit is lower. We try to flow as high as we can, but we're more in that 300 range plus or minus. We just actually switched over to Epic, so now we actually have a real-time calculated DO2 that we can see. So that really kind of helps us determine, what we need to flow and what we need to do to get that a little bit higher. And with that, we'll be able to pull the data, and we'll have a little bit more accurate data on our DO2s. But with that being said, those 14 kids that we did, only one met stage 1 criteria for AKI. So even with a lower DO2, at least in our practice, we haven't seen those kidney injuries. So I think the takeaway from that is, as before all this started, during, and even with our current modifications, we haven't had our AKI rate has actually been the same. We'd hope it would get lower. It hasn't, but I think the good thing is it hasn't gotten any worse. So and our AKI incidence is below the national average. So I think we're trending good, and it just kind of shows that with these lower DO2s, at least in our experience, that we haven't had those kidney injuries. So what we've learned, communication, when we're in the ER, we're not only talking with anesthesia, we're talking with the surgeon. They always want to be aware if we are going to give blood. We are pushing the limit, but with that being said, we can kind of tell now when we're having to give a little bit extra pressures, or we're having trouble with the NIRS, that we just have to give blood. So we don't try to push it and get off bypass and get the ICU to give blood. We just give blood on bypass. We don't want to do any harm to these kids, but we are trying to go bloodless. We minimize suction during cannulation just for dilution of our wrap. It's nice we only have to use 0.3 mLs for blood gas and ACT, so we're minimizing blood there. DO2, again, it doesn't take into account cooling, which we cool all these patients except for the quick ASD, VSD cases. And then the transient low crits during plege, we try to start filtering before, during, and after, just because we're running these crits so low and we don't want them below that 24 for too long. This, again, we're saving money, not giving blood. The more we do this, the better we get. This is just our pig lab, I just want to talk about. This actually gives us the chance to incorporate changes, to kind of see what works, what doesn't work, before we kind of implement it over in the OR. So we really pushed the limit in the pig lab. We're down to 90 of our prime volume, not using a filter, we're using the D100. So that's kind of fun to mess with that and see how small we can get. Limitations, just really I wanted to talk, I think the biggest thing for this is when perfusion tries to push something like this, it is hard to get everyone on board. But with Dr. Bahuda behind this and actually having a surgeon, we did have some pushback in the beginning from, maybe some anesthesiologists, but with him, it's been great. Like everyone now, we're 3 years into this, everyone's, bought in, and we really try almost every case to do bloodless. So in conclusion, I think we can get there with the equipment we have. Normal patient physiology, even with the credit 24, we're not really giving much pressures. These kids are, still are doing okay on bypass. Again, maybe not just treating a number, maybe if we're actually bleeding to give these other blood products. Already talked about the DO2. And then I think these early clinical results are favorable, but I think we definitely need some long-term follow-up just to prove that the safety of this. And I know I'm close out of time or over my time, but just kind of an update over that year and 9 months. We did those 14 cases. Over the next year span, we've done another 15. So we are improving. And I think this is incredible, and I think it's good that we can do all these neonates, but we don't really even talk about all the other kids from the 5 to 12 kilogram range that we're essentially just not giving blood to anymore. So we're working on getting that data to present, but those bigger kids are very easy now, I feel like. So it's been an exciting 3 years. I'm excited to see what we do going forward. Again, Amy and I are here throughout the weekend, so if you guys have any questions, make sure you ask Amy.
We're gonna hold questions for after all the talks are completed. So
I don't know how to do
next
this.
up will be Ron Angona. Ron is Chief of the Division of Pediatric
Cursors.
at Bloodless Children's Hospital, part of the University of Rochester.
No.
Ron is a lifelong MSCI member and has been involved over the years in various capacities, including his previous chair of the Pediatric and Congenital.
I have no idea.
Currently, he serves as chair of the MSCI Pediatric Fellow Review Committee. Professionally, Ron's interests have revolved around blood conservation efforts in cardiac surgery.
Ha, cool. I don't know what you said, Vince, but thanks. I'm Ron, University of Rochester. This is going to be interesting. So we structured this session. We knew the talks were going to be somewhat similar, but Brian and I take a little bit different angles toward things, and I think you're going to find that we're on different parts of the continuum of going bloodless. So I'm excited. You'll see some similarities, but I think I'm going to take a little bit of different angle. I don't have any disclosures. My objectives are to discuss the process we followed to minimize our circuit size, describe safety concerns, successes, innovations, and barriers. I'm going to present a little bit of data, and I'm going to outline what we think our next steps are. This is kind of a continuation of my presentation at AMSEC from last year. And I'm going to just take creative liberty here, and I'm going to give myself 30 bonus seconds. And I know I'm going to get yelled at for this, but this conference takes an enormous amount of planning. All of the things you see here took a lot of work, and unfortunately, she shies from the limelight, but we owe a round of applause to Molly Oldine as our Pediatric Committee Chair. And I did the same thing last year, and she turns red and blushes. But there are so many things beyond this conference that happen within the pediatric community that Molly is intimately involved in and wouldn't happen without her help. So deserves definitely our gratitude. So anyway, I'm going to go over our timeline real quick. 2008, when we moved to a 3/16 quarter circuit. 2012, we moved to pumping off the head. So we've been stagnant for like 11 or 12 years. And the reason we did this is we felt like we have this great system in Rochester, so why change it, right? So I got kind of antsy the beginning of last year, and I was like, all right, we got to start pushing the envelope here a little bit and get out of our comfort zone. So whereas Brian had the push from the surgical aspect, I made the push from the perfusion, and we had great, everybody was on board. Initial outreach to the surgeon, how hard do we want to push to try to really get over the hump of getting bloodless? And I did a little dog and pony show with value analysis, and we put together a proposal, capital purchase, disposable, and it was kind of fun. It was very involved, and the point of it is that it took 9 months, even though we really didn't have any objections. The process took a while. So anyway, our perfusion plan was to incorporate 2 additional dual mast mount pumps. develop a neonate pack, the 1A 3/16, which we had never done before. We thought we were going to do a 3/16 boot, but we never did that. And then miniaturize the rest of the things in our bypass circuit, plegia, hemofilter, suckers and vents and things like that. Like I said, nobody objected. Everybody was on board, from the blood bank to the purchasing people, value analysis, everybody. They just asked me to submit the request. I didn't have to put any proof into it. Lots of delays along the way if you're going to undertake this. We switched to a new vendor. We weren't existing business. There were delays with getting the PO out, waiting for the packs to be built, switching back and forth for different revisions. And like I said, it took 9 months. And we did a few cases with the new circuit layout, and then we moved back to the old circuit layout. And we have, in the corner there, you can see my colleagues, Nate and Ashley. What they're doing there is they're looking at their phones, trying to find the pictures of what the pump frame looked like before we switched it back from the configuration. And if you ever do this, ask your pump rep if you can write on the poles. Is Adam in here? Is he hiding in here? Leave an over rep. After we did the third conversion, he said, oh, you can write with the poles on it with a Sharpie, and then you'll know where the pumps go back to. Thanks. Would have been helpful. Old versus new. On the left was our old circuit. It was beautiful and flowy and elegant, and you could see everything, and then we replaced it with this massive strings, and it's a hot mess. Very unsatisfying, but you can see we moved to a bunch of mast mounts, and that's kind of our general picture. We had lots of early innovation. We removed parts of the pump structure, crossbars. We incorporated the C-arm for the S5. We did this little thingy here where we stacked the pump up. LivaNova hates that. It's being against the IFUs, but it really is kind of cool to level things out. So came up with a lot of creative solutions, and it went through a lot of iterations, moving stuff around. Same picture as Brian. This is what we always look like with our pretty bicable heart, and our surgeon loves this, right? We bicable everything. And we ended up with these sloppy Mickey Mouse ears kind of now, with the pump going, or the venous line going out to the side, and that's so that it doesn't go down into the groin of the first assist and then have to make a right turn. So we, all these little ways you can snug up to the field, and we've worked through different parts of this. In relation to the field, you can see we're right there. You start getting involved with holders, bumping up against drapes. Brian covered this. Sterility issues, handing up lines is real fun. I like this slide. I'm going to transition a little bit into safety here. I'm big into visualization, right? So this is the new circuit setup. The whole slide is, and we don't run our hemofilter through a pump. We clamp it, and we don't clamp it a lot during the case. Once it runs, it runs. But you can see that's kind of like our window where you can clamp it, and you can see that tube back there. It's in the back. But when you put my big fat hand in there, you can see how quickly that space evaporates. And it's tough because it's hard for me to see it, but it's even harder for me to see when my student's doing it. And I'm looking over his shoulder, her shoulder, and circuit miniaturization is a pain for a lot of you who have. I'm surprised at how many people haven't taken this leap yet. It does come into play quite a bit. Further on the safety, we did a lot of just tracking of lab values of BU and creatinine, liver enzymes, things like that, pre, post bypass, time to baseline, really trying to understand if we're causing any unforeseen side effects of this. My surgeon, when we undertook this, said, look, just don't screw anything up. Like, I presented this last year, 5 years of STS data. We gave 9 patients blood products in the operating room. So we were already doing pretty well at baseline. And we didn't want to take any step backs to try to save a few cc's of RBCs. So looking at things like quality of bypass, line pressure, drainage, we're being cautious about it. Finally, things like drug dosing. What do you do when you miniaturize your circuit? We dose some of our drugs by weight, some by circuit size. So far, we've left them all alone. Too much right now. We're just trying to figure out what to do. But we have messed with our blood, how much we prime blood. We do 55 of washed blood. We do all washed blood, and we're very prescriptive about it. And things like, should we reduce the amount of blood, reduce the amount of albumin that we put in the prime since the circuit's a little bit smaller. And finally, osmolality, which we're going to talk about tomorrow, I think, but is kind of an underappreciated aspect of bypass primes. I really think we don't do enough investigation of this. We've been doing this for a while, and prior to the circuit change, we took our old circuit and we did patient baselines compared with our prime, and I know it's high, but I don't do the half normal thing. We don't do any pre-buff. On bypass, you can see in our old circuit, 3/16 quarter, both with blood and clear, we land pretty nicely. With the new circuit, we've only done a clear prime, and we're still doing okay. We have the small circuit now, the neonate circuit, the 1A316. We don't have any historic data on that. Obviously, we never used it before. Priming with the same amount of blood and albumin, we end up a little bit high on the osmolality. So we're going to play with that a little bit carefully and just figure out what prime drugs we want to manipulate. Lots of opportunities for investigation. But here's the blood usage. So what I did was took STS data for 4 years, and I think the three things when you're really trying to compare these populations, what is the surgical procedure, what is the patient size, and what is the patient hematocrit? So I tried to boil this down to, we found 19 patients in, 19 TETs in 4 years that were between 5.5 and 8 kilos that had a starting average crit of around 33. And 3 of those 19 had asanguineous primes. All of them got blood, and the average blood they got was 116 mLs. In our new cohort, and I've lumped these all together. These are transannular patch subvalvar. It wasn't worth breaking them out. Same average starting crit, which I think is super important. All had asanguineous primes. Only 3 of the 5 got blood, and the average blood given was down to 50 mLs. If you take out the asanguineous ones, it's 83. Look at a different patient population real quick. A total veins, a baby. Again, starting crit of around 35. We did 7 of these in the 3-year period. Similar hematocrit, 35. Obviously, we aren't at Brian's level yet with the asanguineous prime and getting blood. But these kids got about 30 mLs less blood, 30% reduction. Does it really matter in that patient population? I don't know. Here's what I love. This is my success. I presented this slide last year. These are these kids that are close, 6 kilos or so, that come in with crappy hematocrits, right? Unless your kid's cyanotic when they're 6 kilos, they're at 4 months, 8 months, they have their nadir crit, they come in with crits of 30. And it's like, what the hell are you going to do with that? So we had one just recently, a win here that I call 6.8 kilos, starting hemoglobin at 10. We got down to about 8.5, but the kid was discharged with no blood or blood products. Last year, this time, he would have gotten a little bit of red cells before he got out of the hospital. So these are the kids that I really hone in on right now. And real quick story, this was kind of neat. So while they were closing this kid up, and Brian alluded to this, these are a pain in the ass. Like, you're flying low, your numbers suck, your SpO2 sucks, your DO2 sucks, and it's like you're trying to wring every ounce out of this. And the last thing you want to do is a kid to go upstairs and get sampled to death in the ICU, healthy biventricular kid. And our ICU is really good. But I went upstairs while they were closing, and I went to the ICU provider who was on, and the mid-levels, and all the nurses, was like 10 people up there, and they're like, hey, are we coming up? I said, yeah, but listen. We just worked our tail off to not give this kid blood. It would have been so easy to give this kid a half a unit of blood and just say, I'm done. So could you please not sample this kid and get him through asanguineous? And the ICU attending put a note in Epic that said, asanguineous cardiopulmonary bypass, which I thought was really cool. I was like, all right, we're all working on the same team here. Where are we saving the blood? Some is saved in the AV loop, but really where we're hitting it is the plegia, the suckers, and the hemofilter with the masked mounts. So this slide is a little noisy, but there's 3 columns. The left is the old circuit, the middle is the new circuit 3/16, and the far right is the new circuit 1A3/16. So our prime volume. Okay, if I'm looking at prime volume, right, the money shot, this is, I call our prime 145 in the old circuit, and then when you drop to the 1A3/16, it's 122. But if we're PLNing it right now, and we're looking at real definitions with the hemofilter and the cardioplegia and blah, 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 we're more in the 260 range. That would be the reportable number. You can see we chopped that down to 167. So there's a huge reduction, and that's because our plegia set is way smaller, our hemofilter is smaller, and all that. So that's the big thing. And also in our suckers and vents, what we call our dynamic prime, right? Those are way lower, 87 mLs in the old down to 28, and that's across the board in each sucker and whatever. So what happens is during the case, the kids aren't dropping as far, right? So instead of dropping to 7 after we gave cardioplegia with this last kid, or with that 6.8 kilo kid, he dropped 8.5. So we were able to ride it out. And I think that's, in our program, that's what's really big right now. Okay, last data slide. This is 2018 to 2022, 5 years of STS data. This is under 10 kilos, all comers. We had, I think it was 339 patients. This is looking at asanguineous primes and no operative blood. Asanguineous primes in the previous cohort of 339 patients was 27%. With the, I think this was 14 cases with the new circuit, we're at 64% under 10 kilos. In the no operative blood, 12% under 10 kilos. In the previous cohort, we're already up to 27%. And overall blood usage, we're looking at 110 in the old and 59 in the new. Again, this is under 10 kilos. This was a slide I put up last year. These were our goals last year at this point. We're not quite there. We want to increase both asanguinous primes and no operative blood and decrease our blood usage. So we're getting there. It's been effective. Feedback and observations. Surgeon says, doesn't bother me too much, lines look good. And he said a couple times, are you ready to give up on the small venous line yet? 3/16 venous, I don't love it. Handing up lines sucks. Multiple circuit revisions. I say our LV vent is twitchy, tiny line, short line, trying to get to not suck down and stuff. And echoing Brian's sentiments, we just made really easy cases a lot harder. Next steps for me, going to continue to work on that visualization. Going to start to incorporate maybe a small arterial pump for the neonates. We were talking about the logistics of how you're going to switch back and forth between a big can and small can. Is that worth it? We tried to get high, get up to the level of the atrium. It worked fine, vacuum reliant, of course. And surgeon was like, I don't love this. I just don't love routinely using vacuum assist. So we're going to kick that down the road a little bit. Move the hemofilter. We tried putting the junior on a pump. That's been fun, and other things. And then, of course, next year, as soon as I get all this figured out, we're going to move to new bypass pumps. Conclusion, circuit miniaturization has been a process. These two patient populations with starting low crits and kids with pulmonary hypertension. Surgeon can't get away from kids got pulmonary hypertension, I want them to come off with a crit of 36. We don't usually come off that high. We're a low hemoglobin center. But if you're going to target a kid you want a kid to come off with a higher crit than he went on bypass with, I can't, make red blood cells. Are we making a difference? Does it matter if you still have to give blood? Does asanguinous matter? I think it does. Not a lot of evidence. And do the reductions in blood usage outweigh the trade-offs in safety? Should we keep pushing? Only a handful of kids so far really benefit clearly from this. But I think the bottom thing is the most important. It gives us a platform to keep moving forward when we get a new pump system, more modular pumps, and getting everybody used to this idea. So that's all. Thanks.
Test.
Thank you, Ron. Great presentation. And to our virtual audience, too, we're tracking the questions. So please submit your questions. We'll get to those at the end in the last 15 minutes. Our next presenter is Chinnappan, who will be talking about post-dilutional albumin. Isaac is a practicing pediatric perfusionist and currently employed at Johns Hopkins Children's Center, Baltimore, as a chief pediatric perfusionist. He graduated with a master's degree in perfusion technology from Rush in Chicago. He holds numerous certifications in blood management of CPB-MP and CPB-MS and ECMO CESA, and is awarded as one of the original pediatric fellows of Fellow in Pediatric Perfusion in 2012. He has authored and co-authored peer-reviewed manuscripts and participated in several scientific presentations at regional, national, and international perfusion meetings. Isaac is currently serving AMSET on the board of directors as Zone
4.
Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Where is my presentation? Should I open my presentation or they will upload? Justin, they will. It is not responding.
Hey, Ron, did you follow through on that for your presentation to get to the next one?
No, it is not even responding.
Yeah.
The mouse is not responding.
Yeah, the mouse was giving us a hard time on the last one. Somehow I figured this out before. Excel, that's good. Where is the freaking mouse? There it is. Okay. Which one are you? Which one are you, Isaac? Post-dilutional albumin.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, after a long day, thank you so much for attending this session. And also, I'm thankful for the moderators for moderating the session. Special thanks to the conference planning committee for giving me this opportunity to talk about this topic. When Molly called me to give the topic like post-dilutional albumin, that is one side of the coin. The next side is the colloid osmotic pressure. So I thought probably I can finish this topic, both the side of the coin within the time allotted for my presentation. It's not. No. Very slow. It has gone all the way. Wait. It is responding now. Wait. Perfect. No disclosures. It's not even responding.
Is who available to navigate this?
You see, it's gone to the final slide. So we have to choose from here or what?
Okay.
Oh, I can move from here.
But if you do that, it doesn't show up there, so let's see.
Or if they have this one. One sec. This is necessary. I have another my own. This one, my lighter. I can put the USB and I can handle.
Work for the other two. So.
You see, it is not coming here. They won't help us or not?
Your mic back on.
Sorry about that. No disclosures. So the objectives of this presentation is to estimate the post-dilutional albumin, to estimate post-dilutional colloid osmotic pressure, quantification of hypertonic albumin in the prime with reference to patient weight, patient volume, baseline albumin, plasma volume, and priming volume. To review for few relevant concepts like FFP in the prime, 5% albumin in the prime, or hyperosmotic solutions like mannitol, or hyperoncotic fluids in the prime. Finally, a few other ways to calculate the colloid osmotic pressure. First, for the calculation purpose, before going to the calculation, in this room, just for the neonate infant population, how many of you just use 50 ml of albumin in the prime? Just I want to see. The neonate infant population, no matter what, if it is a 2 kilogram or 8 kilogram, 50 ml in the prime. Okay. So for the presentation purpose, our patient is 5 kilograms, hemoglobin of 12, hematocrit 36, total blood volume 425 ml. That is 5 kilogram, 85 ml per kilogram. So by seeing this one, RBC volume, initial plasma volume, we can calculate. That is from the school days. We have been doing this one. Baseline albumin is 4 grams per deciliter, and the priming volume is 285 mLs. Very straightforward stuff. Now, just like post-dilutional hematocrit, what I'm going to do here, we are calculating the plasma volume, and from the plasma volume, we are calculating the post-dilutional albumin. So initial plasma, the first 3 line is from the previous slide. Initial plasma volume is 272, priming volume is 285, and the baseline albumin is 4 grams per deciliter. So by keeping this one, when we talk about the 4 grams per deciliter, the total albumin for this patient is in 272 ml of plasma, that is 4 grams deciliter times 272. that is 10 grams around. Since it is 10.88 for the calculation purpose, I'm making it as 11 grams. So what is the post-dilutional albumin? Now I got 11 grams here times 272, that is the patient's plasma volume, divided by 272 plus 285. What is this 272? Patient's plasma volume plus 285 is my priming volume. The same thing we will do for the post-dilutional hematocrit by taking the RBC volume here. Now the next one is, by just with the simplification, it came down to 5.4. So post-dilutional albumin, so this is total post-dilutional albumin. I want to calculate per deciliter. So post-dilutional albumin deciliter means 5.4 in 557. What is this 557 again? 272 plus 285. Plasma volume plus my priming volume. 5.4 divided by 557 times 100, that gives me 1 grams per deciliter. So the post-dilutional albumin per deciliter is 1 grams per deciliter. So what happens in this slide now? The 11 grams total albumin came down to 5.4, and the grams per deciliter, 4 grams per deciliter, came down to 1 gram per deciliter. The preference-based physiological serum albumin in the prime, why I'm saying here preference is in the neonate infant population, the albumin range is like 3.5 to 6. But 80% of the patients not even having that 4 level or 5 level. Just this is the preference base. I'm keeping this 5 because the cardiac surgical relevant loss is significantly higher. So if I keep like 6 or something like that is hyper level, I would say, but still I'm keeping the lower level just for the calculation purpose. If your institution or if you have personal preference based on your discussion with a surgeon or with your anesthetist, you can keep whatever the number you want. I can come to that point later. But in the slide, what we are seeing here, the 4 grams per deciliter came down to 1, or the total albumin 11 grams came down to 5.4. Now the post-dilutional, the first 3 line is again from the previous slide. For the mathematical purpose, I am keeping those numbers so that it will be easier to follow. So the post-dilutional albumin, 1 grams per deciliter. Physiological serum albumin in the prime is 5 grams. And the required albumin now is 5 minus 1 grams per deciliter, that is 4 grams per deciliter. Again, 4 grams per deciliter, not the total albumin. My total volume is this patient's total, the blood volume is 85 ml per kilogram, 5 kilogram patient, so it is 425. My priming volume is 285, so it is 710. So again, the 425, 285, what is that? Here I put patient volume plus priming volume. Now what is the required albumin? 4 grams in deciliter times 710, that is the total volume what I got here. So that gives you 28.4. In order to make it as a round number for the calculation purpose, I made it as a 29 grams. Now, the required albumin in the prime is 29 grams from the previous slide. Required albumin is 25% albumin, what we are getting here in the United States. Is the 12, if you are getting in the 50 ml, it's 12.5 grams. If it is 100 ml, it is 50 grams. So 25% albumin, that is nothing but 0.25 grams per ml. So therefore, required 25% albumin equals 29 divided by 0.25, that gives me 116 mLs. So what is the 29 grams if you are converting into the per patient calculation? 29 grams equal to 5.8 gram, since our patient is 5 kilogram. 29 divided by 5, this is 5.8 grams, is the grams per deciliter, grams per kilogram albumin is required. So we'll keep that concept as a post-dilutional albumin. The next concept is post-dilutional colloid osmotic pressure. This slide, whatever you're seeing, that is the very first slide I showed. Patient weight, total patient volume, hemoglobin is 12 grams, 36% is the hematocrit, and initial RBC volume 153, and the plasma volume is 64%, that is 272 mLs, and my priming volume is 285 ml. So these numbers are we discussed already. So physiological colloid osmotic pressure, we talked about so many things, circuitry, what is the comfortable hematocrit level, all those things, preference-based, surgeons-based. Some people will say 24, some people will say 30% and all those things. But physiological colloid osmotic pressure is very constant, that is 25. I can't change that number. So the post-dilutional colloid osmotic pressure in that case, 25 times 272, the 272 is nothing but patient's plasma volume divided by 272 plus 285. 272 is the plasma volume and 285 is the priming volume. So if you simplify this one, 6,800 divided by 557, 12 millimeters of mercury. So what's happening? The impact of dilution, 25 is the number, came down to 12. So the post-dilutional colloid osmotic pressure is 12 for my patient as of now. Now, post-dilution colloid osmotic, how I'm going to counteract this dilutional effect? Now, if I add 285 mLs of colloids, why I got this 285? My priming volume is 285. Now, I have to do something as a colloids, 285 mLs, to minimize the impact of hemodilution on the colloid osmotic pressure. So in the 285 mLs of colloid, this is iso-oncotic colloid. Hyper, iso, both are different. I will come to this point in the coming slides. So iso-oncotic colloids. So if we simplify this one, 25 is the colloid osmotic pressure, 285 is the patient's my priming volume, plus 272 is the patient's plasma volume, divided by 272 plus 285, the same plasma volume and priming volume. Here, for the simplification purpose, what I'm doing, if I add 285 mLs of colloids, I don't need the priming volume of 285. So 285 minus 285, I can simplify, this is 0. So now the simplification of this formula is 25 times 285 plus 272, 557, divided by 272 plus 285, 557. If you simplify here, just if you cancel this one, 25. So in the previous two slides, what's happening? My physiological colloid osmotic pressure is 25. That came down to 12 because of my dilutional impact. After adding the colloids again, the 12 has gone to 25. Now, what we are going to do now, 100 ml of 25% albumin is equal to 500 of any colloids. You might be knowing hyper-oncotic solution, 1 ml of hyper-oncotic solution equal to 5 ml of iso-oncotic solution. If you see the blue book, manual book, or any other colloid or osmotic pressure related textbook, it will show iso-oncotic 1 ml equal, iso-oncotic 5 ml equal to just 1 ml of hyper-oncotic. What does that mean? The plasma volume expanding nature of the hyper-oncotic solution, like 25% solution, is 5 times more than the iso-oncotic solutions. So again, 100 ml of 25% albumin means 25 grams in 100 mLs. Since I want to 285 ml of colloids from the previous slide, 285 divided by 5 of 25% albumin. So that means 57 mLs of 25 albumin is required for this patient in order to counteract the hemodilutional effect. Further three things, 25% albumin is nothing but 0.25 grams per ml, that is 25 grams in 100 ml or 12.5 grams in 50 ml. Most often we used to get this one. So 50 ml of 25% albumin equal to 14.25 grams, since 0.25 gram per ml times 57 mLs. So 14.25 grams if I give divided by 5, that is approximately 2.85 grams per kilogram, since my patient is 5 kilograms. Now, two numbers you should remember. Number one, in the first presentation, post-dilutional albumin, I showed like around 5 grams per kilogram of albumin is required. By calculating the colloid osmotic pressure, I'm showing here 2.85 grams per kilogram. Why this variation? Couple of reasons. Number one, the priming volume is intact. I can calculate the colloid osmotic pressure based on the impact of the hemodilution. But when I'm coming to the on-bypass, if I'm seeing 30% of the 30% is the hematocrit, it doesn't mean the remaining 70% is the plasma component. Your other fluids, isotonic fluid, all the osmotic related fluid, all those fluid will be there. So what we have to do, what the textbook says, you can do the post-dilutional colloid osmotic pressure for the prime and if you can calculate the post-dilutional albumin supplement for during bypass. So how we can do this one? Some centers, some people, they won't give the supplement albumin, but if you can send the sample while rewarming, if you are lucky enough, if you get that albumin, you can give a supplement dose based on exactly how much is required in order to come back to the colloid osmotic pressure of 25. So some centers no albumin in the prime, just they will take FFP. How to justify that one? Since I want 285 ml of colloids, can I give 285 ml of FFP? Is the question. FFP is a volume replacement or volume overload. It will cause the circulatory overload if you take too much FFP. Albumin content in FFP is just 3 grams. What is the FFP we are getting from the blood bank is only 3 grams per deciliter. FFP is not recommended as hyper-oncotic or as a supplement for albumin. No literature recommends FFP is a supplement for albumin replacement. If reconstituted blood product is your priming solution or whole blood as your priming solution, that is a different story. I can talk about for 2 hours about those two things if I want, the reconstituted blood products or whole blood priming. So that is not the objective of my talk. So now if you see the cardiopulmonary bypass related textbooks or perfusion related textbooks, what they say 16 millimeters of mercury or 18 millimeters of mercury is the colloid osmotic pressure required during bypass. But if you see cardiopulmonary bypass pulmonary related complications in circulation or pulmonary journals, post-operative pulmonary complications related journals, because the fluid shift occurs especially in the neonate population at the pulmonary level, not in the tissue level. So this article, they are recommending like 20.8 plus or minus 2 in order to prevent pulmonary edema. The other article, which is recommends like 25, around 25, anything below 25, it causes fluid shift in the neonate infant population. There are so many articles that recommends what is the safety efficacy of albumin in the prime, risk factors for low colloid osmotic pressure, and the other one is what is the optimal option for during cardiopulmonary bypass, whether it is a higher colloid osmotic pressure or hemoconcentration or both. Here again, the other article which talks about the risk factors, and this paper talks about what is the optimal colloid osmotic. They are recommending like 18 to 20, but they are recommending for further studies to see the fluid shift at different levels. Recently, last year we got this one, but relevant to this hydrostatic pressure based on the hemoconcentration, very long back, 10, 12 years back, we got 2 more articles that justifies how to calculate the colloid osmotic pressure. So the discussion point is, can we use FFP to supplement albumin? Answer is FFP either to supplement fibrinogen or 83, not for colloid osmotic pressure. 5%, 20%, 25% albumin, quantity and quality with reference to the colloid osmotic pressure, not one dose for all the patients. Existing plasma volume and the extent of hemodilution is the primary factor to calculate your colloid osmotic pressure. Does 57 ml of 25% albumin for our patient here, is that equals 285 ml of FFP? If you add 285 ml of FFP for a 3 kilogram patient in order to get the colloid osmotic pressure, what will happen? Just imagine. Theoretical concept of dosage and practical concept of administration both are different. So mannitol, that won't give any colloid osmotic pressure. It is osmotic pressure, otherwise hypertonic fluid. So post-dilutional concept like albumin, fibrinogen, platelets, 83, these are all we can calculate with a specific formula and calculations. Other ways of, this is the last objective of my presentation, that is other ways to calculate colloid osmotic pressure. Albumin globin ratio with relevant converting factor. The problem is albumin constitutes 80% of the colloid osmotic pressure. When you talk about the total protein, 50%, 60% is albumin, 40% is globulin. So the globulin role in colloid osmotic pressure is negligible, so it is not very popular. 25% albumin transfusion, this formula, better than me, Daphne can explain, that is from MUSC I got Daphne's technique. Anion gap, based on anion gap also we can do based on that osmotic pressure versus oncotic pressure classification, but we don't have any supportive documents for the anion gap. So the theme of this session is good, better, best approach. Perfecting pediatric patient management. That was the theme they gave the conference planning committee. What I did, perfecting pediatric patient perfusion management. 3 things is important. Number 1 is evidence-based, exposure-based, and experience-based. These 3 things will give us to do the best practice. The good news is the Pediatric Congenital Perfusion Committee is working on toolkit or worksheet to calculate or estimate many variables as quality metrics for conduct of pediatric perfusion, which will be available in the near future. That is the good news from the PCPC. So for the perfusionist, 2 things is important. Number 1 is numbers, number 2 is the fluid. So recently I saw this one in the social media. Water, it can boil you to death, it can freeze you to death, it can drown you to death, but still we need it to survive. So similarly, as a perfusionist, I can say we may use so many fluids, but we need to qualitatively quantify to get its maximum clinical impact for the best practice. So in summary, post-dilutional albumin or colloid asthmatic pressure should be at or near physiological range. Consider the surgical loss of colloid asthmatic pressure, both the hemic side and the non-hemic side. Hypertonic colloids like 20% or 25% albumin are the only fluids to supplement post-dilutional albumin and or colloid asthmatic pressure with reference to the literatures and textbooks. We need to qualitatively quantify to get its maximum clinical impact for the best practice. Good, better, best. Perfecting pediatric perfusion management is not just a theme, but it should be our routine, professional, clinical lifestyle. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Isaac. Always a great presentation. Next up, we have Mr. Alex Robertson, Chief Perfusionist at Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children in London, Honorary Lecturer in Pediatric Perfusion at the University of Bristol, Registrar and Vice Chair of the Society of Clinical Perfusion Scientists, and Council Member of the College of Clinical Perfusion Scientists in the United Kingdom. He will be talking to us today on DO2 calculator.
Broke it again. Back and forth. Yes. Yep. Which one's the pointer? That one. Got it. Thanks, Vince. Has everyone got a calculator? We'll get those out. Yeah. No. So we'll be talking about DO2 in pediatrics and the work we've been doing with DO2 calculation. I'd mentioned this a little while back to some of the organizers, and I got an email saying, "Hey, come and talk about it." So here I am. Disclosures, I've had partial funding from AMSEC to get me here, which is great, and I've got some additional funding from the charitable organisation attached to our hospital, and I've got no commercial affiliations at the moment, but I'll be going around the exhibition hall later, touting myself. So delivery of oxygen in paediatric cardiopulmonary bypass. We'll look a little bit at how far we've come in that and the advent of goal-directed perfusion, and then we'll see how DO2 thresholds have emerged in the literature for both adults and pediatrics. And then we'll look at temperature and metabolism, the Q10 quotient versus percentage change in basal metabolic rate, and the influence of dissolved oxygen and its increasing importance as you get colder. So how far have we come? In 1997, I was a trainee perfusionist. This guy was just being sworn in for his second term, so it's a long time ago. And in those days, I worked with perfusionists who would literally say, "This is my PO2 monitor." And they were very, very suspicious of these newfangled inline monitors that didn't tell them anything that I already know that my PO2 is fine. It was also recommended to me that the brand of cigarettes that I should smoke, not whether or not I should smoke, but the brand of cigarettes I should smoke was Marlboro, because every good perfusionist kept a packet of Marlboro on their pump, and when you went on bypass, you made sure your oxygenator and your packet of cigarettes and your art line were exactly the same, and I've seen perfusionists pick up the cigarette packet and put it next to the art line. So that's where we were. In those days, we worked on institutional preference of what's your minimum hemoglobin level, what's your minimum flow and cardiac index, what's your minimum SVO2 percentage. And we back that up with intermittent blood gas analysis looking at the metabolic values. And we go, okay, yeah, we're doing a good job. So that's really all that we had. Jump forward several years and we had a 2005 paper from Ranucci, which gave us the first metric for DO2 and DO2I, looking at protecting the kidneys in coronary surgery. And we had the first number, 272 mils per minute per meter squared. But they also said, actually, the hematocrit should be around 26%, and if that's a bit too low, you can offset that by increasing the pump. So things we kind of already knew. So that's 2005. Jump forward a couple of years, and we have Gary Grist's oxygen pressure field theory, which gives a little bit more insight and refinement into gas exchange and tissue respiration as well. So refining our practice and understanding things a little bit better. Another couple of years on, and we have an evidence-based approach to optimal perfusion in cardiopulmonary bypass. And the evidence base that we have still says that the optimal hematocrit is not yet defined, that DO2 is determined by pump flow and arterial content, which we knew, and that you do encounter dilute anemia, and that organ damage can be prevented by turning the pump up. So that was the evidence that we had, even as recently as 2009. Jumping forward a couple of years again, and we've got Philip DeSoma's paper where we actually see the phrase goal-directed perfusion, and they have another metric for the threshold of DO2 to protect the kidneys of 262 mils per minute per meter squared, and we also have the concept of the DO2 VCO2 ratio, keeping that above 5.5. We've got goal-directed perfusion now, 2011. A couple of years after that, everything goes in 2-year little leaps. And you've got the International Consortium for Evidence-Based Perfusion, their new guideline document, and guideline 10.2 says that now oxygen delivery and consumption calculations should be used by the perfusionist to evaluate and optimize gas exchange. And they've got this handy little table for you to use with hemoglobin on one axis, cardiac index at the top, assuming 100% saturation with a high PO2, and it tells you what your DO2 actually is. So that's great. You can sit there with your table on pump and use that. And going forward, quite a big leap now to 2019, but the Boston group also published their reference where you've got your body surface areas for adults, 1.5 up to 3, saying what your BSA is and what your hemoglobin is, and it shows you what your flow will need to be in litres per minute in order to maintain a DO2 with a threshold of 280 or above. So we've got these calculation tables now available to us. So where does that leave us? Well, the quick reference guide for goal-directed perfusion published that year, Inject, said that you've now got a choice as a perfusion cardiac surgical program, and you either need to adopt expensive dedicated DO2 monitors, or you have to actually condemn the perfusion to perform complex, potentially distracting calculations whilst on bypass. Taking your calculator out, getting your slide rule, using all of these tables and so on. Thankfully, somebody somewhere knew how to use Excel, and on the AMSEC website the year afterwards you have this actually interactive DO2 calculator. You put the demographic data in, height and weight gives you your BSA, you've got your on-pump dilutional hematocrit, and you put in your PO2 and saturations of arterial and venous, and this will actually give you your DO2, in this case with the patient of BSA 2.24 and the DO2 of 308 and so on, and this will calculate it in real time. No longer having to use the tables, you got your data in, you just put in a few numbers, tells you what you're achieving, so that's great. So where have we come from? Molly's going to look at that and say, hang on a minute. So I literally stole this from Molly's presentation. I think it was 2021. So thanks for this neat little summary. But coming back from the Ranucci paper up to 2020, and you've got these different thresholds of DO2I for protection of the kidneys, ranging from the low 200s up to 300. And you've got this sort of consensus that it's probably around 270, 280. Most people are working on around 280. But again, all of this is in adults. But that's taking us up to 2020. And now in 2023, we've got our first systematic review and meta-analysis of the efficacy of DO2I in protecting the kidneys from Jinping over in Beijing. So there we are. We've come a long way from a packet of Marlboro cigarettes to meta-analysis of DO2. But again, all in adults. So what about pediatrics? Well, there are papers out there, and Isaac said, yeah, you know, there's some papers in COP, and there's more coming out in DO2 as well, and we've got these papers from 2020 and coming up more recently. And looking at neonates, threshold of 340, lower than 3 years. Both of these by Zhang have 360, 353 in patients under 3 years old, and we looked at all comers 16 years and under, all of our patients, over several thousand that we had in the database, and we came up with a threshold of 350. So what's reassuring in that is that there's consensus within the pediatric data as well. You know, early days as it is, but we're settling around that 350-ish mark as a threshold for DO2 index to protect the kidneys in children. So meanwhile in London, I've got my own Excel spreadsheet. And you think, well, why are you doing that? But I did the similar sort of thing. And you've got the demographic data up there. We've got calculation cells. The top bit is for DO2 based on hematocrit from published equations, and the bottom part is the same based on hemoglobin. So you can see it here. You've got the BSA, and I took the same numbers into this calculator that were the ones, the baseline from the AMSECT one. So you've got the 2.24 BSA, cardiac index of 2.4, all the same numbers, converted the PO2 into kilopascals at normothermia, and we've got 346 for it based on hematocrit, 308 based on hemoglobin. Unfortunately, that marries exactly with the both the AMSECT calculator and also in clinical use what the CDI 550 was showing us. So I thought, okay, I've got the calculations right. We'll use the hemoglobin-based one. So that's all well and good, but what about temperature? All of these papers are talking about your DO2I threshold to protect against acute kidney injury in patients as if they were at normothermia. But we cool patients down. We always cool patients down. They used to do it like this. I hope most of you have seen this patient. There's a patient with their feet hanging out the end of the bath. The anaesthetist got the mask on, and they're filling it up with ice. They used to just hoik them out, put them on the table, open up, clamp the KV when they were cold enough. So temperature works. So we know we cool the patients down. The reason we do that is because as you drop your metabolism, you need less oxygen. So you should need a lower DO2I. But how do we know? How can we calculate all of that and factor that in to our DO2 calculator? So what does the literature say? Well, we've all got our own ideas and quotients for this, and going back to 1991, this is North Carolina, so Duke presumably, Ross Ungerlead is in there, looking at the Q10, and the Q10 is the relative change, the ratio of change in basal metabolic rate given a 10-degree difference in your temperature no matter where it is, so 15 to 25 or 27 to 37 or whatever, it's the ratio of change. And they found, looking at animal models, it was anywhere from 2 to 3.5. In adults, it was around 2.4. And in neonates, infants and children, it was as high as 3.5 or higher. So you get, according to this, you get more bang for your buck by cooling a patient down. So you can drop your flow more than you would for an adult, given whatever temperature that you're at. A couple of years later, Ungerleader again followed this up, and their data showed in infants and children a Q10 of around 3, actually. So 2.4 for adults, 3 for children. But one of the other numbers that we're all very familiar with, moving away from the Q10, is the percentage change in basal metabolic rate. And I'm sure we're all familiar with this, with the drop of 7% in CMRO2, the cerebral metabolic rate of oxygen consumption per degree that you go down. And when you put this in graphic form and calculate it, it gives you a Q10 of around about 2, in fact, so lower than the published data, both for adults and for children. Incidentally, those of you who are using the spectrum quantum system, there's a metabolic compensation feature in the data analysis that they have, and in the brochure for that they say you could, of course, as an institution you choose your own, but you might want to choose 7%. You know, it's a fairly standard number, and we looked at that in a Q10 of 2, and we said if we're going to actually introduce this clinically, we're going to start conservative and be safe. So let's choose this one. It's a standard number. It's lower than the published data for pediatrics, so we'll probably be safe with that. So we can now factor in a 7% drop in your basal metabolism per degree that you go down and change your relative delivery of oxygen based on that. Sorry, going backwards. So all well and good, but what about dissolved oxygen? We all learned how to calculate oxygen content of blood for our exams. We all know that it's all about hemoglobin, and the dissolved oxygen is virtually relevant because its solubility coefficient is very, very small, so we never think about it again. But actually, as you get colder and colder, the influence of dissolved oxygen increases, and it can do so quite dramatically. Took me a little bit of digging around in the literature to find it, but I did find equations for oxygen and CO2 solubility coefficients in saline and in human plasma, thank goodness. And here's the data you've got from temperature range of 37 right the way down to 15, and here's the solubility coefficients for oxygen in human plasma there. Looking at that graphically, we get almost a nice straight line, as you would expect, thinking about Henry's law. And with the temperature range from 36 down to 18 degrees, that gave us just over a 1.5% change in the solubility coefficient of oxygen per degree that you go down. So we've now got data that we can also add into our DO2 calculator and increase incrementally the influence of dissolved oxygen given your partial pressure that will augment your delivery of oxygen as you get colder. So the calculator now looks like this with our data. Again, the same from the AMSECT one. So we've got our 308, 309 or so. There we are. But now you see the patient is at 27 degrees, and we now have the relative delivery of oxygen index, which is now more than double. Even though we've got a Q10 of 2, you'd expect that to be double, so you'd expect that to be about 620, but it's in fact 640 because of the increased influence of dissolved oxygen, because you get more oxygen in the blood for each kilopascal or millimeter mercury partial pressure of oxygen. Just a bit of fun, but I thought, I wonder how low you can go and how you can manipulate this. So I was playing around with the calculator, and according to this, small child, BSA of 0.3, high cardiac index of 5, but with 0 hemoglobin, so no hematocrit, no saturation because there's no hemoglobin at all, a PO2 of 46 kilopascals, which is around about 350 millimeters of mercury. You wouldn't be expecting to deliver much oxygen, but you wouldn't, because at normothermia it's only 72, but because you're down at 15 degrees and it's far, far more soluble, theoretically you can survive keeping your threshold of DO2 above 350 at 15 degrees with no hemoglobin at all. I wouldn't recommend you do it. That's not data from a real patient. That's just me sitting around with a coffee going, oh, I wonder, you know. But what it does show you is the increased influence of dissolved oxygen as we get cooler and cooler, which we tend to forget about. So we use EPIC, and I took all of this stuff and I sort of did a mini presentation like this and emailed it all to the chief surgeon and the head of cardiac anesthesia at Great Ormond Street, minus all the Marlborough stuff and all of that. But I said, look, here's some numbers, here's some data, here's some evidence, and here's what I've been doing to work it all out. Can we do this clinically? And they looked at it and said, makes sense, yes, let's do that. So as I say, we use EPIC at Great Ormond Street, and you've got a whole pile of data. This is just a snapshot of a case from that we did recently, and it's all there numerically. My brain doesn't work like that, so I have it graphically. So when you put it graphically, our display looks something like this, and at the top you can see the temperature going down there. This big tangle of stuff is your cardiac index, your heart rate, your blood pressure, your VO2, and so on. At the bottom, we've got left and right nears, and here we've got DO2. You can see we've got the blue one, which is DO2I, and now we've got embedded in here with the 7% drop in cerebral metabolic rate of oxygen and the increased solubility coefficient of dissolved oxygen factored into our relative delivery of oxygen index. And at 37, it stays normal and it gets wider. And there's another little snapshot I took from another case that looks nice and clear. with all of the other noise taken out. And you can see starting at about 37, when we go on bypass, we cool down to 32, not too far. But our DO2I, we keep at 350. But as we get cooler, you can see the relative DO2I until we plateau with the temperature moves away and away and away and gets higher and higher and higher. And they will move further and further apart the cooler you get. And we now use this clinically in real time. Sorry, I'm just second to last slide. And what we'll do is we will keep our threshold of DO2 at 350, but now when the surgeon asks us to drop the flow, we keep the pink line and the relative DO2I above 350. So we don't automatically drop the flow because we're cool, we keep it where we were. But now we've got a threshold based on change in metabolism that's relatively conservative and increase in dissolved oxygen in real time, giving us that little bit more confidence when the surgeon says, drop the flow, drop the flow, drop the flow some more. As long as the pink line stays at 350, we should, in theory, be relatively safe in terms of relative delivery of oxygen index, given the temperature that we're at. So the final question is, were we right to be cautious with that Q10? We selected with the 7% a Q10 of 2. Should we actually be bolder and go up to 3, 3.5, as the literature says? Well, Richard Izzet, who's a research perfusionist, is working with Sherban Stoiker in Bristol, looking using machine learning, looking at prediction and control of oxygen extraction for goal-directed perfusion. And what they're actually finding down here is that Q10 may actually be a little bit less than 2 with the data that they've come up with, which, as they say, which is below the 2 to 3 that's quoted in the literature. This is unpublished, unvalidated, chatting in the corridor data. And he said, oh, you might want to have a look at some numbers we've got. But don't use that. It's draft data and maybe coming to a journal near you soon. But what it does show is perhaps we were right to be cautious. And when you're implementing change, start gently, start cautious, and then take it from there is what I would recommend. Anyway, that's what we've been doing in London. Thank you for your attention.
Alex, excellent presentation. And rounding out good, better, best, we are delighted to have Dr. Eric Vu, who will be speaking on blood pressure and autoregulation. Dr. Vu is a pediatric cardiovascular anesthesiologist at Lurie Children's Hospital and Northwestern University. He is the medical director of the Division of Pediatric Cardiac Anesthesia and the program director of the Pediatric Cardiac Anesthesia Fellowship. In addition to taking care of children with congenital heart disease in the operating room, Eric pursues research in the area of analytics and physiological waveform analysis and has been supported with grants from the Foundation of Anesthesia Education and Research, the International Anesthesia Research Society, and the NIH. He is working on real-time analytics for the detection of cerebral autoregulation with work supported by the Additional Ventures Single Ventricle Research Fund. Dr. Vu, thanks for being here.
Thank you. Worked when I tested it earlier.
Don't disconnect anything here.
Services this. That was always there.
Is this your slide deck?
Yeah, it's my.
It's your deck. Let me see. This is all. Oh, is this your computer too?
Yeah.
Can I look at the other computer too?
Yeah.
See if it's possible. I'm gonna look at the other. Was it uploaded all on my
Hello, everybody. The OR is still at the table. We shouldn't be gabbing away like this. since we're having some technical difficulties here, I thought while we're working on that, why don't we go ahead and take some questions for the presenters that we already had, so that we've got a little bit of that going on. So any questions for, Alex, Isaac, Brian, and, oh, there's Ron. Okay, so you're all here. So starting off, any questions? We're ready to go. Excellent.
Testing. Okay, great. All right, thank you guys for having me today. I'm sorry for all the technical difficulties and delays, but I'm going to spend the next about 30 minutes. I'll try to cut it down and make up the extra time, but to talk to you about cerebral autoregulation and blood pressure management in the OR and how it affects congenital heart disease. So if you take out your phone and scan that QR code, it'll actually launch some interactive polling we'll do throughout this talk. So you'll have a couple of chances, and if you can't get to the QR code, it's just pollev.com/Eric Vu. So you can work on that as we go. I have no disclosures. My presentation doesn't include any discussion of off-label or investigational use, and then work on these projects that I'm going to present to you today was supported by a couple of foundation grants and the NIH. And so to test out the interactive polling, it should push to your phone, hopefully, but you could please mark where you're from. And that's great, it's working. All right, great. So we'll move on to the next question. What is your role? So I'm going to type in pediatric cardiac anesthesiologist. And there it is, but I think I'll probably be dwarfed in a second. All right, great. So I'm a pediatric cardiac anesthesiologist. I work in the OR. I have a passion and research interest in data and big data and how data surrounds us. So if you look at patients, they're surrounded by data, and we do tons of monitoring both in the anesthesia realm and the perfusion realm, that as we've learned about in this session. And when we think about how we process this data, they say that the average adult makes about 35,000 decisions per day, and this is about 2,000 decisions per hour, or one decision every 2 seconds. And this isn't even in the pediatric operating room. So this is just in day-to-day life, we make that many decisions. So you can imagine how many decisions we make as we take care of children with congenital heart disease. And so there's a ton of data that surrounds us in the perioperative environment. And part of what I'm interested in is how do we make sense of that data. And so what I'll talk to you about today is a specific interest of mine, which is how do we monitor for adequate cerebral autoregulation in congenital heart disease. So if you look to your phone, I'm going to push this question to you. If you had a 5-day-old, 3-kilogram neonate who's a little bit preterm, born at 36 and 5/7 weeks, and they're about to undergo a Norwood, so what flow rates would you target on bypass? All right, great. Let's see what everyone thought. All right. Oh. It's not showing the answers, but call it out. What would you guys target? About 200. All right. 150. Okay, so I'm hearing some 150s and 200s. All right. Now, same question. What mean arterial blood pressure would you target on bypass? All right. Oh, it's just the color. Sorry, it's white on white. But it looks like 10 people would target 35, 11. So 35 to 40. So that sounds very reasonable. So let's begin by talking about autoregulation and some of the background behind it. So autoregulation, as we know it, is a concept where the organ, there's a maintenance of constant cerebral blood flow. So when we talk about cerebral autoregulation, it's really this flat part of the curve where cerebral blood flow is maintained at a constant flow rate despite a varying range of cerebral perfusion pressures. And so there are, if you dig into the literature, there are a lot of different mechanisms behind this. One is myogenic control of arterial resistance, one is neurovascular coupling, but what we're mainly talking about today is pressure autoregulation. It's the autoregulation that you and I can change by affecting the blood pressure that the patient or the brain experiences. Outside the limits of autoregulation, shaded here in red, the cerebral blood flow is now passively dependent on cerebral perfusion pressure. So on the far left, blood pressure decreases and cerebral blood flow decreases. And on the right, cerebral perfusion pressure increases and cerebral blood flow increases. So small changes in blood pressure in this red area will cause cerebral ischemia on the left and cerebral edema on the right. And the whole crux of the research that we do is delineating the limits of autoregulation. So how do we actually know what that specific blood pressure is for that patient that's on the operating room table? In a study of adults, and this was over 200 adults at Johns Hopkins, this was done in adult patients receiving either cabbages or valve surgery. The lower limit of autoregulation in this adult cohort was a blood pressure of 66 millimeters of mercury, and there was a wide variance of 43 to 90 millimeters of mercury. So how do we actually measure cerebral autoregulation? It can actually be measured by using the pressure reactivity index, and this is a method out of Cambridge. And so the way it works is it correlates at a very slow frequency arterial blood pressure and intracranial pressure. So these patients received ICP catheters, and the correlation was made between arterial blood pressure and intracranial pressure. So if the autoregulation mechanism is intact, as arterial blood pressure increases, ICP decreases. And so there's an opposite relationship when autoregulation is intact. When you're at the far left or the far right of that autoregulatory curve, they move in tandem. So as the arterial blood pressure increases, the intracranial pressure increases as well. Or if you're on the far left of that curve, as ABP decreases, then your intracranial pressure decreases. So you have positive correlation when we look at these two metrics. We found in our lab that you can actually measure cerebral autoregulation non-invasively by using something called the hemoglobin volume index. In this method, it uses the cerebral NIRS, or cerebral oximetry, as a surrogate to ICP. So basically, you can use a metric called the total relative cerebral total hemoglobin, and it's measured. It uses the isobestic wavelength of deoxy and oxyhemoglobin, and then now we correlate arterial blood pressure with this isobestic wavelength from the NIRS. What's great about this is now we don't have to drill holes in our patient's head to measure cerebral autoregulation and can just apply a sticker on the forehead. So if you look at your phone, I'm pushing another question. If you initiate a bypass and the mean blood pressure is now 50 and additional fentanyl is given and isoflurane is at 1.5%, what would you do next? Let's see. So it looks like the majority would reduce bypass flows. One person would give phentolamine. It looks like a couple would give an afterload reducing agent such as sodium nitroprusside or nicardipine. And then 4 people said no intervention is needed. So one of the questions that we have in our research group is, does the intraoperative management, meaning what you and I do in the OR, really matter? And I personally think that it really does. So if you look at a patient from fetus all the way up to childhood and adolescence, there are a lot of factors that play into the neurodevelopmental outcome of the patient. And so if we look at what we do in the OR, we oftentimes don't think about what happens beyond that OR time, but in fact, it really does make a large difference. If you look at neurodevelopmental impairment in congenital heart disease, About half of neonates have neurological injury after congenital heart disease, so 1 in 2. That's pretty high, in my opinion. And looking at the data, of course, as the patient has more complex congenital heart disease, they're at risk for more severe neurodevelopmental impairments. So how can we mitigate neurologic injury? We want to avoid the far left of the cerebral autoregulation curve, meaning we get cerebral edema or paraventricular leukomalacia, which is ischemic white matter injury in the brain. And we don't want to be too far right of the autoregulation curve because then we get intraventricular hemorrhage. So one of the key tenets or key landmark papers was an animal study in baboons. So this was a group that placed baboons on bypass, and you can see here that cerebral blood flow is indeed dependent on blood pressure. So in this group to the left, there's a group of baboons, and they were placed on bypass, and the green is at the baseline, so they're control. Then at full flow and low flow bypass, if they were kept normotensive, the cerebral blood flow was indeed constant. When patients were made to be hypotensive, even at full flow or low flow bypass, cerebral blood flow at this was reduced. So said a different way, how can we mitigate neurologic injury? We want to, again, avoid the far left of the cerebral autoregulation curve, and we want to avoid the far right of the cerebral autoregulation curve, trying to find that sweet spot in the middle. And so there are numerous modifiable hemodynamic factors that we can utilize. So we have drugs, we have antiarrhythmic drugs. We can think about preload and such as volume or diuretics. We have vasoconstrictors and vasodilators, and then we can think about pump flow and pulmonary vasodilators. So if you look at your phone now, if after ACP and circulatory arrest, the mean blood pressure is now 25, what would you do? Would you increase your pump flows, give some phenylephrine, or would no intervention be needed? All right. Let's see. So it looks like majority, 8 people said increase bypass flows, and then 1 person would give phenylephrine. So all of these are just thought-provoking questions, and I don't really know the right answer. I have inklings, and I don't think that anybody really knows the answer, but I want to go ahead and present some studies on neonatal autoregulation that we've done. So one of the first questions we had was, can we actually measure autoregulation in neonatal heart surgery? So what we did was we took a cohort of patients receiving congenital heart surgery at Texas Children's Hospital over a 5-year period, and this was 563 patients. We then found the patients that had the 2 requisite signals to calculate autoregulation, and this was an A line, so arterial blood pressure, and then a near sticker placed on the forehead, and this was all collected with our data collection system. I then harvested that data and then calculated the hemoglobin volume index, which again is that index of autoregulation. This was our study population, so 145 patients. Their average age was 12 days old, and then those were their diagnoses and the cases that they underwent. And again, I calculated the hemoglobin volume index for each patient, and this is that index of autoregulation, and stratified the data by age of patient in days. We then characterized the lower limits of autoregulation in this age group, and we defined the lower limit of autoregulation when that hemoglobin volume index was greater than 0.2. A linear regression was then utilized to look at the correlation between the lower limit of autoregulation and the age of the patient. And then we wanted to see how well we did in terms of targeting blood pressure, and we quantified the time when patients were below their lower limit of autoregulation. And again, this was all done retrospectively, so we didn't know that we were going to do this at the time, but we did collect the data so we could look at it afterwards. And so here I present the data, and on the x-axis here, you'll see the blood pressure. So it goes from 0 to 100 millimeters of mercury from left to right. On the y-axis is that HVX value, which is the index of autoregulation. And if you'll remember, positive values are net bad, so you don't want positive values because it means that you're off the autoregulatory curve, and negative or low values are good, meaning that the brain is autoregulating. As we tilt out a little bit, you'll actually see the autoregulation curve stratified by age of the patient in days. So far back into the screen is 0 days of age, all the way up close to you is 30 days of age. And then now I'll begin rotating the plot, and you'll be able to see that we were able to calculate or create autoregulation curves for each for our cohort and and stratify them by days of life. And then, so what you'll see here, even with your eye, is that the blue areas are the blood pressures where the brain is autoregulating around that flat part of the curve where cerebral blood flow is constant. And then on the far, now it's to the right, are the low ends of the blood pressure, and that's where the blood pressure is too low and the brain is no longer autoregulating. If you don't think about things in 3 dimensions, this is it plotted in 2 dimensions. So this is the lower limit of autoregulation from by age, and then you can see the lower limit ranges from 25 to 40 millimeters of mercury, and each day and age corresponds to a 0.3 increase in the lower limit of autoregulation. But what you notice is, although the trend exists, there is a large amount of variance in the data, meaning that the same patient, or sorry, different patients at the same age may have different lower limits of autoregulation. We then wanted to see how well we did in terms of targeting blood pressure in this cohort. So we looked at the average percent of time spent below the lower limit of autoregulation by age. And we see that overall, we were about 20% below the lower limit of autoregulation. So for 20% of our bypass times, our blood pressure was too low. And again, this was very regulated at the time when I was there, and we basically targeted very aggressively blood pressure targets, but admittedly, there were targets that I made up at the beginning of bypass where we had kind of a timeout as we went onto bypass, and it was asked what blood pressure target should we stay above, and I always said 35 or 40 because I knew that's what everyone wanted to hear. So we then quantified the severity or dose of hypotension, and this was done by multiplying the millimeters of mercury below the lower limit of autoregulation multiplied by the time that a patient spent below autoregulation. And so you can actually see what was interesting here is that younger patients, so 15 days or younger, actually had a more severe dose of hypotension when we look at our cohort. And so how will we really know when to intervene in real time? And so what's needed is a real-time monitor of autoregulation. And this is something that we've designed. And it takes, for the monitor to work, it requires just two signals, again, the arterial blood pressure signal, and then a NIRS signal to look at the isobasic wavelength of light. And here on the x-axis, you see a 6-hour window, and then the red line you see there is the mean arterial blood pressure in real time. On the right here, at this arrow, is the lower limit of autoregulation. So the algorithm has calculated that for this particular patient, you want to stay above a blood pressure of 52, and the upper limit of autoregulation here is 95. And then this line here is the current blood pressure, which is 40 millimeters of mercury, and there's a warning sign here because you're below the lower limit, which is 52. On the left here, there's a histogram of how you did during the case in terms of where the mean arterial blood pressures are, so you can actually see with your naked eye how well you did in terms of targeting the flat part of the autoregulatory curve. And so what this monitor can potentially do is provide the clinical team a real-time understanding of the limits of autoregulation so that the team can actually target blood pressure management. And so here's a video of the monitor in real time. So this is in our hospital, this was a TET, an 8-month-old TET coming off of bypass. And you can see here that the current blood pressure is 43 or 44, and it's below the lower limit of the calculated lower limit of autoregulation of 50. And so as time goes on, the team begins to raise the blood pressure, and so now you're above 50, which is in that desired autoregulatory zone. But again, I want to highlight that it's not quite so simple. So if I'm thinking about hemodynamic goals to separate from bypass, I want to make sure there's adequate preload. I want to make sure that the afterload is normal, low normal, or maybe even a little bit reduced depending on the cardiac function. And so we know from our decades of experience that high afterload in the neonatal population reduces things like stroke volume, cardiac output, reduces organ perfusion, and then increases end diastolic pressure, increases cardiac wall strain, and increases the incidence of post-op cardiac arrest. We also need to balance the concept that we want adequate coronary perfusion pressure. So we know that coronary perfusion pressure is the diastolic blood pressure minus the left ventricular end diastolic pressure. And we can also estimate this using the or left atrial pressure or the right atrial pressure. But we basically have to balance having a an afterload that's low enough, but not so low that we jeopardize things such as coronary perfusion pressure. And so I want to take a couple minutes and talk about what do we know from adult studies. And so we know from adults that delirium carries high morbidity and mortality. It does things like increase the ICU length of stay, increases ICU costs, and even beyond the hospital stay, it reduces your cognitive function and it also causes functional decline in the patient even when they go home. So a lot of efforts have been placed into looking at preoperative risk factors for postoperative delirium. And then for intraoperative risk factors, we know that the site of surgery, such as abdominal or cardiothoracic surgery, carries an increased risk of postoperative delirium. But also a lot of bleeding or long duration of surgery can cause postoperative delirium. And postoperatively, pain can actually be one of the main causes of delirium. And so this is an algorithm created in 2017 by the European Society of Anesthesiology. And what they did was they looked at the fact that different areas of postoperative delirium. And here in green, they talk about ways to prevent it, how to monitor it in blue, and then different therapeutic options we have to treat postoperative delirium. And so as an anesthesiologist, I kind of gravitate to column number 2, and I can see that for monitoring, there's not a lot of monitoring that exists. So there's a depth of anesthesia, so the bispectral index can be used to monitor how much anesthesia you're giving. But if you notice here under therapy, there's actually no therapeutic options that are suggested to take care of postoperative delirium in the OR. And now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about an adult randomized controlled trial of targeted autoregulation in cardiac surgery. So again, this is an adult study. It was conducted with data from Johns Hopkins and Northwestern across the street from us at Lurie. And it basically randomized patients to either receiving targeted blood pressure management using the autoregulation monitors that I described earlier, or standard of care, which is no monitor at all. And so depending on which arm the patient was in, the perfusionist knew what blood pressure to keep the patient above during bypass, and they were able to treat that blood pressure with boluses of phenylephrine. So as expected, the patients who received the monitor had about twice the amount of phenylephrine given during the course of the case. And then, as expected, they were able to reduce that burden of hypotension by about half, and this was statistically significant. But their main outcome, or their main finding, was that patients who had autoregulation targeted blood pressure management had a 30% reduction in postoperative delirium, which was a very large finding. This was the breakdown of their data, so that's the reduction of delirium, and then the reduction also in the number of days of delirium in their patient cohort. And so this was really exciting for us. It wasn't published in the paper because it wasn't one of their primary outcomes or their intended outcomes. But when we looked at their safety monitoring data, we saw that patients who had autoregulation targeted monitoring had a reduction in dialysis, had a reduction in kidney injury, had a reduction in multi-system organ failure, and had less inotrope use, and then also had a reduction in death. But again, the study was not powered for any of these outcomes, but it is provocative and interesting to us. So how do we tie this all together, and what does it all mean? I think that the story still continues to be written in terms of autoregulation and blood pressure management. But if we take it down to the core principles, we always want to maximize perfusion and oxygen delivery. And it's important to remember that aortic outflow isn't a single vascular bed. So although blood pressure is one number that we're targeting, the different organs respond differently to blood pressure management. So the brain, heart, and kidney and other visceral organs respond differently to different stressors and interventions. I believe that real-time monitors of cerebral autoregulation can identify optimal blood pressure targets specific for the patient. And our retrospective studies have demonstrated lower limits of autoregulation of 66 in an adult and 34 in a neonate. But again, there's a wide variability in this blood pressure, so I do think that patients need to be monitored on a one-on-one basis. I think that eventually what will happen is that targeted blood pressure management will have to consider both a patient's measured lower limit of autoregulation and their comorbidities. So do they have history, if you're taking care of adults, do they have history of stroke, et cetera? But irregardless, I believe that prospective studies are needed to apply, are needed so that we can apply targeted autoregulation measurements and association associations are needed so that we can see if this technique really does correlate with improved outcomes in patients. Otherwise, we're just creating measurements just to measure things. But the good news is that this is on the horizon, and we're currently conducting a randomized controlled trial in pediatrics and looking at outcomes. And of course, in pediatrics and neonates, it's much more difficult to measure things like delirium, but we're getting pre- and post-operative MRIs and following their neurodevelopmental scoring after their surgery and beyond. These are my acknowledgements. Of course, it takes a whole team to do work like this, so I thank all of these individuals, and that's it. Thank you.
We are a few minutes over time here, and the exhibit hall social is happening now, but I want to take this opportunity, if any questions for Dr. Vu, and then maybe as we trickle into the social event, please approach Isaac, Alex, Brian, and Ron to ask them questions about their presentations. We thank you for your patience with the technical difficulties there, but as we all know, we're all professionals, and we thank you for your patience and staying around to the very end. So, any questions for Dr. Vu?
What do you expect from that publication?
Heyo, coffee.
Sorry.
When are you expecting that to be published?
Oh, when are we expecting our publication to be published? So, as you know, in pediatrics, we always lag behind adults. And so just to give you an idea, the adult study was completed in, I think, 8 years. And so we just started this last year, and we've enrolled 5 patients, but it's going to be across different centers. So at our center, we've enrolled 5 so far. So our goal is to enroll 20 or 30 for preliminary data, and then hopefully we take it from there.
When we do alpha stat, pH stat, when we cool down to 18 degrees, the school of thought is go to alpha stat, blow out all the CO2. The reason is enzyme preservation, and number 2 is autoregulation preservation. Do you believe at 18 degrees centigrade in neonate population, do the autoregulation still exist?
Yeah, so the question was, does autoregulation still exist when we cool a patient to 18 degrees? And I definitively, I think yes, because we have done pig experiments where we have demonstrated this, and it's published in the literature. I know that for a while there are some groups that believe that autoregulation is ablated when they're cooled, but we've studied this in neonatal piglet model, and we found that there is indeed autoregulation even when you're cooled to 18 degrees.
So the hypercarbic perfusate still diminish the, I'm sorry. The hypercarbic perfusate diminish the autoregulation?
So that is a very controversial question, and so there are some studies that show that it diminishes it, but some studies show that it doesn't make any difference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Vince Olshavy, Louisville, Kentucky, great presentation. I have a question for you. You're using NIRS as part of this, yes?
Yes.
Have you looked at the variation? Has this all been done with one manufacturer? And if you looked at the different technologies, and is there any difference by using different manufacturers?
Yeah, great question. So we have done most of our research using the Invos NIRS from Medtronic, and have even worked with them to build an algorithm that is rolled out. And you can imagine with large companies and industries, you get pretty far along, you're almost there, and then like they dissolve the the group, and so you start over again. But they have a new vested interest in developing this commercially in terms of utilizing it for their Medtronic algorithm, and we're testing it actually in our adult hospital. The Invos algorithm. For Foresight, they actually have a non-invasive arterial blood pressure that you can place on the finger as well. So they also have a lot of interest in developing this. But personally, we have a lot of experience with the Invos just because the ease of acquiring the data from the monitor. but I know that all of the various manufacturers are competing over developing this technology.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Do you routinely monitor a flank sat? I can speak really loud. Great presentation. Do you routinely monitor a flank sat?
Yes, so at our hospital, at Lurie Children's, we do routinely measure a flank sat. And I know where you're thinking or where your mind is going with this. And yes, you can actually look at kidney autoregulation. So on our display, which is all done through computational programming, and it's a web-based monitor, so you can open it up for any patient from any internet address in our hospital. But you can actually look at kidney autoregulation and brain autoregulation at the same time.
Okay, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so very much, Dr. Vu. Great presentation, and all the presentations wonderful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.